Good morning and good afternoon to those of you who are joining us today for the ClassWallet webinar series. As we get started, I want you to pay a little bit attention over there to your toolbar, and in your chat, you should see a request. We would love to know where you're from, your current role, and how long you've been in that role. By answering those questions, it will help our presenters guide the conversation so that we're sure to hit on all of the most important topics for you. As you know, you've registered for a webinar today to talk about budgeting and taking your budgeting to the next level. We do have a great group of people here to talk about that topic today. But before we get into it, we just wanted to give a big thank you from ClassWallet. As you know, ClassWallet is a leading digital wallet technology platform for federal, state, and local education and government agencies. You probably know a good amount about ClassWallet, but if you are interested in learning more, please do visit us at classwallet.com. I'll also be dropping an email address in the chat for our friend Jordan Garnett, who is behind the scenes today helping us out, so that if you do have any questions about ClassWallet or about today's presentation or a specific question for the presenters that you may not feel comfortable asking in the chat, you can go ahead and drop it there. Also, we are going to take a look. If you look at that Q&A, you can also use that for your questions so that we can have a running tally of all of the questions that are asked. And with that, I am going to move it over to our guest panel today. Terry, Joe, Gretchen. Terry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Dawn. Appreciate that. I'm Terry Hass. I'm a retired CFO from the state of North Carolina. I began my career in a small city district. For those of you that aren't familiar with North Carolina, we're mostly county districts. There are just 15 city districts left, and I had the privilege of starting my career in one and ending my career in another one, but also serving in between then and to a variety of sizes, including one of our largest, Charlotte-Mecklenburg school district, as the director of budget. So I'm excited to share with y'all today on this wonderful topic of budget at this time. Joe?
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Dawn. I'm Joe Martino. I'm from Regional School District 15 in Connecticut. Connecticut's set up a little differently. We have some, regular town boards of education, but I work in a region. So we have two towns, Pine, Middlebury, and Southbury, which comprise our region, which is a little different in our structure. Prior to that, I was in a large urban district for 8 years as the CFO in Danbury, Connecticut. And just happy to be here.
And I'm Gretchen Saunders, and I am originally from Michigan and got to Florida as fast as I could. And I've been in Florida and started my school district career in 1995 in a small school district that had 8 schools, and then moved to a large school district, Hillsborough County, in 1996, where there were over 250 schools. And then just in 2021 moved to a medium-sized district with 50 schools. So in Florida, for those of you that aren't familiar with Florida, we have actually the counties. There's 67 counties in Florida, so we have 67 school districts. Coming from Michigan, it's kind of like what Joe was saying, where he's at in Connecticut. It's all kinds of different size districts. So Florida is just a little bit different, and that's a little bit about myself. I'm currently at the St. Johns County School District, and that's in St. Augustine, Florida, and it's a phenomenal place and full of rich history, and it's the oldest city in the United States. So we have lots of wonderful visitors. And so if you all get a chance and you want a vacation, come to St. Augustine. Thank you, Dawn.
Oh, thank you so much. Great introductions. All right. For all of you who are joining us today, this is one of my favorite formats for a webinar. We're not looking at slides. We're looking at people's faces. We get to see emotion. We get to see people answer questions and impart some great information so that all of you can take away and start to apply it to your own situations. So let's kick that off. The first question that we have for the panel is, And if you don't mind, with this first question, I am going to kind of call on each of you to describe your situation. So the first question, Joe, I'll have you answer first. How is the funding organized in your state? We started just now talking a little bit about how different states organize things differently. So how is the funding organized in your state? Is it state mandated, locally driven?
So our funding, there is through the state of Connecticut, we get each city and town gets what's called an educational cost sharing grant. So a town will get a percentage based on their wealth and their different parameters against the Anglican index, the scoring index that ranks towns in Connecticut. And so different towns will get different money, or more or less. That percentage for us probably makes up maybe 10% of our overall budget, and then the rest kind of falls to the local taxes through the towns. So then obviously the local tax base for our two towns would pay towards our educational funding.
Great. How about you, Terry?
North Carolina is different. The majority of our funding comes from our state. We're very state driven in North Carolina. And so probably 50+% of our funding comes from the state General Assembly, so that they dictate how we use that money down to individual pots of money, as I like to call them. They allocate it by classroom teachers, by exceptional children's program, by non-instructional support, all those types of different categories. And so then the other portion of our funding comes from our county governments. Even if we're a city school district, our county governments are responsible for providing us the local portion of funding that we get. And that is, if you're in a district like I was in, starting my career and ending my career, where there happens to be a city and a county district, they fund both of them at the same amount per ADM, so that it's fair based on the number of students that you have in your population. So again, very state driven, and then local governments pick up things that the state doesn't fund.
Right. How about you, Gretchen? You started to talk a little bit about how Florida is organized. How's the funding work?
Oh, and so it's really a combination of kind of what Joe and Terry were saying. So in Florida, it's a combination of state and local funds. And with the 67 counties, you can imagine there's 67 different types of counties. And we like to say in Florida, you're either property rich, meaning you have a really, really great tax base. So imagine if you look at Florida and you think of the Keys. Okay, everybody down there is on a key or on an island, and they're surrounded by water. And that county is called Monroe County. Well, they are planning all the time for hurricanes, but to live there is like the average cost of a home down in the Keys, or it's like $600,000. So they have a huge tax base. So we call a district like Monroe property rich and student poor. They don't have a lot of students. Whereas a smaller district such as Leon County, up where Tallahassee is, our state capital, that's more student rich and property poor. So depending on your county, you're either funded. We only have a couple of districts that are 50-50 funded, 50% state dollars, 50% local dollars. But we all are part of what's called the Florida Education Finance Program, or the FEFP, which is what we lovingly refer to it. It began in 1973, and it's been modified every year by the legislature since then to meet the needs of the growing state. And the legislature meets, and if I go too much into this, Dawn or Terry or Joe, just tell me, cut it out. But it's just a little bit different. But we're funded state and local dollars, and so it's everyone is funded equally, whether you're student rich, property poor, or property rich, student poor, of the opposite. And we go with what's called the DCD, or the district cost differential. So once every 3 years, they'll go out and purchase 10 items in a basket, like a secret shopper, and they'll go to each county and purchase these items to see how much does it cost for a Happy Meal in the Panhandle versus the Keys? How much does it cost for this pair of shoes, this exact pair? Anyway, that's how we're funded, based on what we call cheeks in the seats. So twice a year, we do a survey during the normal school year, and once in October and once in April. Depending on how many students you have in the various programs, that's how you're funded. That's how your dollars are appropriated. So we have 67 school districts. We have 6 lab schools, which are located on university campuses. And then we have 1 state virtual school. So again, everyone's funded based on cheeks in the seats and the survey counts. And then those dollars are given in categories, as Terry was saying, in the different buckets or categories where we receive transportation dollars, which can only be used for transportation. We receive instructional material money or textbook money that can only be spent on textbooks, and so that can't be bargained with the unions. But again, that's kind of a breakdown depending on your tax base and the number of students in your district. So each district out of all of those ones I mentioned are funded. There isn't any 2 that are funded the same.
Interesting. All right. Any comments on the different types of approaches to funding? Because in follow-up, we do have another question here about the taxing authority in your school district. So if you do have a taxing authority, how do you approach this with the public? And if not, how is funding determined? Maybe Gretchen, do you want to jump in on that one since you're just finishing up, kind of leading us toward that?
And that's a great question. So in each of the counties, when we're building the budget in the summer, we receive our first calculation after the legislative session ends, and then we take to the board the first public hearing on the budget. And at that time, out of all of the 67 school districts, when the legislature sets each individual county's millage rates, we take that to the school board and they have to approve it. That's what goes on the property tax bills that are sent out from the property appraiser's office. Every district, they have a choice. They can choose to accept the millage rate and pass it, and that's the dollars that folks are paying, or they can turn it down and say, no, we're just going to live on our locally generated dollars. Well, in my history, and I think since 1973, there hasn't been a school district that has taken, running with their own local dollars, because there's not enough to sustain itself. So every summer we come to the school board, we request the millage rate and go forward. Now, that's for the general operating budget every year. We do have the ability to go out to the voters for a sales tax, which can only be used for our capital programs or safety and security type items, or that can be up to 10 years. So we can go for a penny sales tax, half-cent sales tax. That's above and beyond the normal budget. And additionally, we can go out for operating millage. That is every 4 years. And those dollars could be used for, a lot of times it would be for programs such as the arts, music, PE, programs that school districts can't afford to fund, but maybe every 4 years they go out to the voters, say, hey, we would like to raise an additional penny for our programs. And again, it's got to go back to the voters every 4 years. So it's a little hard to try and plan longer than 4 years, because you don't know if the tone of the community at the 4-year mark, they're going to vote for more taxes. So we're kind of a hybrid in Florida with taxing authority, but it just depends on what the needs are for the school district.
Interesting. Joe or Terry, do you want to jump in with taxing authority?
Yeah, we do not have taxing authority in Connecticut. We don't set, here we set mill rates, but no, that's done by the town. So we basically submit our budget over to the towns, and they add us in almost as you would another department in a city. So if you're part of like public works, let's say, so they build our budget inside of their number, and that becomes they have the taxing authority.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Terry?
Yeah, North Carolina school districts don't have taxing authority. However, there are 2 little unique districts in North Carolina, and I happen to work for one of them at the end of my career in Mooresville, that do have, their Board of Ed does have taxing authority. And when Mooresville graded, I'll speak to it specifically, Roanoke Rapids is the other one. But in Mooresville specifically, when it was organized in 1905, there was a supplemental tax rate of 33 cents. That was set that the board could go up to that amount of taxing, and the Board of Ed in Mooresville actually can adjust the amount of that supplemental tax that they levy on their constituency themselves. Other school districts in North Carolina, not all of them, but quite a number of them, have a supplemental tax that their public voted on. But if they want to increase it, they have to go to their county commissioners and ask for approval to increase it up to whatever amount that they were allowed by the vote of the public. My first school district that I was in, Kings Mountain, we had a supplemental tax. And one year we wanted to raise it up a penny so that we could get rid of students going door to door fundraising. And so we had to go to the county commissioners and ask their permission to be able to increase that. So again, North Carolina really doesn't have the millage or the taxing authority that other states have, but that supplemental tax is sort of our way of having a little control at the local level. Unfortunately, most districts have to go to their county commissioners still to get that approval, but they're usually most happy to do that because, again, like Joe said, we're kind of considered a department of the counties. And so when they create their budget, and we have to be in the pot with the police department, health and human services, all those other things. And when they set their property tax rates in North Carolina, I laughingly say that school districts continually get blamed if the property rates go up, tax rate goes up, because, we had to do that because the schools need more money. And that's why your property taxes went up. It's never because, we need more law enforcement or we need more fire and health and safety people. It's always we need, the schools ask for more money, so we've got to raise that property tax rate.
Yeah. And speaking of that, in terms of the request for more money and the prioritization around the needs for more money, let's talk a little bit about budget planning. First and foremost, what is the time of year that you all begin that process? Probably always thinking about it, but when is it like that meeting gets set and we're kicking off what the budget season looks like? You can all just jump in. Like when do you start that process?
So I'll just jump. Oh, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
For us, it's about, let's say, late October. So we start construction on our budgets. Our budget season, I feel like everyone's is quite long. We actually have a budget hearing tonight. We won't go to vote until May. May 3rd is ours. But yeah, we'll start development really in October, pulling contracts, seeing where union contracts are, all that kind of stuff. And then it's kind of moves on from there. Department chairs with superintendent presents the budget the end of February. So it's a pretty long journey.
All right. How about Terry, Gretchen? Similar?
Similar. We start about November timeframe because our county wants our budget by March timeframe for them to incorporate it into theirs. So our board in February, March has to do their review of that budget and approve it. So having to start that process at least no later than November to get that started, which for North Carolina is a complicated process because since we are so state driven, as I said, at the introduction of how we're funded, our General Assembly doesn't pass their budget that early. And since our salaries are set by them, our benefit rates are set by them, it's you're having to use a crystal ball almost to look and see what kind of salary rates increases you're expecting, what kind of benefit rates to incorporate into that. And sometimes you get lucky and, you're in the second year of the biennium and it's a short year and you kind of know where they're headed, maybe, unless they make some major adjustments. And other times you do it and you're not on target at all. And that causes some issues once your budget's adopted and having to restructure.
How many years generally have you each been involved with a budget cycle?
33.
Call it 15, 20.
Yeah.
I've been over 20 also.
I kind of assumed that we were going to get like decades for answers, which is why you're here. But and at the same time, I have to imagine each time you walk into a new budget season, You want to approach it with, this year, I'm going to do it better than last year. This year, it's going to get done with some time to spare. This year, it's going to be more efficiently done so that it runs like clockwork. And yet each year you find new complications that get thrown your way. And you're like, oh, I wasn't thinking about that. So are there ways that you would suggest, because of your experience, two things? One, kicking off that process. What's the mindset like? What are some of the ways that you go into in order to prepare for that October, November meeting to feel confident and competent about moving into the budget cycle? And then secondly, what are some of those best practices that you would suggest to share in terms of successful strategies? So let's start first, mindset going into that budgeting cycle. What are some of the things that would describe that?
Well, if I can jump in, I'll just say that all during the year, as we're having, I'm part of the leadership team. So all during the year, as they're talking about things, and I'm listening to where they would like to be, where they would like our students to be, I'm making notes and I'm putting those in my budget folder, because I know that at some point that's going to become part of that next year budget. If it doesn't, bubble to the top of something that we can absorb within the current year, that I know that's going to be part of that process. So I'm always trying to listen all year long and hear what's going on and what people are thinking, what are their plans, kind of, be part of as they're planning things for the new years, so that what questions to ask, what things to anticipate that you're going to need to incorporate into that budget document beyond the normal things that, you have to do, the salaries, the benefits, the ongoing cost increase. But, what are the new things that everyone's looking at? And then, in the same tone, starting to think, are there things we've been doing for a long time that I need to start talking to folks about, that maybe, if we want to do something new, what can we potentially start to drop off?
Okay, great. So listening is a big part of this. And then also proactively thinking about what's new, as well as thinking about what's old. What can we get rid of? What can we move to the side so that we can make room for something new? Okay, anything else in terms of what you would share with our audience in terms of a mindset going into the budgeting season?
So I'll just jump in and I'll just follow up, Dawn, if I can, about when we start ours in Florida. It's a little bit different again than the other states. We have to give our student projections. So 67 school districts give their student projection numbers for the upcoming school year in December to the Department of Education. The Department of Education pulls all the data together, and then they provide that information to the governor's office and the legislature, so the House and the Senate. And the governor is the first one to come out with the upcoming budget. He comes out with the budget always first, and then the House and Senate start looking at the numbers, and then they go into legislative session. And then, so next week we start our budget meetings with our schools. So each school we meet face to face with, and we look at, what are the student number projections, and did they vary from what we provided earlier in the year in December? What are their program needs? How many new teachers are they going to hire? Everything that you would need to build the basic budget, and how much has it changed every year? Now, this has been the tried and true way in St. John's for a while, and it seems to hold true. The only change or the outlier is, what is the focus in the legislative session or the governor? Do they want? So the last 2 years ago, the big push was to getting teacher salary, beginning teacher salary to $47,500. So that's the big push. We still have school districts in the state of Florida that cannot afford to pay $47,500. Majority of school districts are there. So they gave us $800 million in Florida to start that process. How can you get this much, how can you get that further? Or the safety issue, when we had all of the school shootings going on, so much dollars were given to everybody to put a school resource officer or resource deputy in every school. So it just depends on the focus, and that's what's a little bit difficult to try and plan for every year. But as Terry said, you're listening, you're you're watching, you're putting yourself in every meeting that you can, because remember, money touches everything. So you're always whatever happens in a school district, we love our kids, we love our teachers, but I tell everybody, I see folks and they have a dollar sign on their head, whether it's a green dollar sign or a red dollar sign. Like, I'm costing the district money because I'm not in front of kids, I'm not generating revenue. But we all need to come together, and whatever we do, from the minute we wake up in the morning and the kids get on the school bus till the time they get home and they've got their afternoon snack with them and they're, getting home to do their homework, it costs money. So we have to be on the lookout. And I love what you said, but what are the new programs? But what can we stop? Do we need 26 bullying programs? Do we need, okay, then what's the latest and the greatest? Because our instructional folks will come in like, oh my gosh, I was at this conference and I saw the best reading program in the world. We need to buy it. Okay, well, what about those 6 other ones we have going? So we bring something in, we got to stop something. Because I always go back to saying, hey, we can do anything you want, we just can't do everything.
Great, great.
I think kind of similar to all folks too. Like, what, for example, as I sit through my cabinet meetings, all of the meetings I'm in, you're kind of, to Gretchen's point, you're always looking at, as folks talk, like, okay, so that's going to be a program they're going to come out or try to put in, or maybe you'll hear about, FT or enrollment counseling. There's a 1 FT reduction somewhere out there, right? Kind of once the budget is submitted and final, you kind of literally make a folder that says, budget the next year, whether it's 24, 25, and you kind of start throwing stuff into that digital folder of, okay, so this is something that's going to come, or we're going to talk about this for a minute. And again, the same things with capital planning. As you go through facilities, there's always things there you need to either add or remove, or high school want to add a culinary room or renovate one. So I do think, like, budget season is just budget year. I think as a good finance director, you kind of always got to be cultivating, because then that's how you add value to Gretchen's point, to Terry's point. You're always trying to, because people forget programs they own. Like, oh, what about that thing we did? Oh yeah, maybe we don't need that, or maybe we do, or maybe we'll put more money into it. So I do think it's, your job is to continue to kind of poke people for stuff, and I think that's a good value.
So in this process, what kind of people do you surround yourself with in order to create the best budget possible? What are the, how are you compensating for the different viewpoints of stakeholders? How are you creating a team that understands, and, like Terry, to your point, the listeners who are always out there thinking about or hearing what's going on and then bringing it back into the process? So how do you involve others? How do you ensure that you are listening to others? How are you ensuring that you are integrating the different perspectives in order to create a budget that reflects all of that?
Kind of like Gretchen said, you've got to incorporate yourself in a lot of meetings. I think I messed with them really bad when I went to Charlotte Mecklenburg, because I came from a small district. So I left a district that had 8 schools and I went to Charlotte Meck with, almost 100 schools, and almost 100,000 students at the time I joined them. And, I started asking questions of the curriculum folks of, so what are, you're wanting to do this. So what does it do? Because like Gretchen said, if you've got 5 different programs out there that are all doing the same thing, are they, really sustainable? And do you really need 5 different programs out there? And so again, making sure that folks know that as the finance person, you have the best interest of the district at heart, that you want to know what's going on, because as one of the ladies that I worked with in my very first district told me, because I sat through a principal's team meeting and I'd only been there several months, and I was sitting there and I was patting the table, and sitting there thinking, dear Gussie, will these people never shut up and let me go back to work? And I said to her when we went to lunch, I said, I don't understand why I'm sitting in this principal's team meeting. All you're talking about is curriculum. Because I came out of the private sector being at a CPA firm. And so I thought, accountant, I've got to work on numbers. She said, Terry, you understand something very important. You understand where the money is and how we can spend it. If you listen to what we want to do, then you can help us use that money to the fullest that we can for our students. And I took that with me everywhere I went. So it's not just the leadership team that you incorporate in the budget process. It's listening to the principals and the principal team meetings. It's going out and being part of all the different curriculum, potentially the curriculum meetings that, you know, you don't have to sit through the whole thing, but you probably want to sit through enough of it that you get a gist of what they're thinking and what they're wanting to do.
Mm-hmm. Others want to chime in a little bit about the people that are part of this budgeting process?
I will. So again, to back up what Terry said and Joe, it's interesting to see not just listening at the principal meetings and at the community meetings at the schools or the PTA or the PTO meetings and, you know, what are the hot buttons for the parents, but when you have a change in staff, whether you have new department heads or division heads and people are retiring and now people coming in, we've got a new team coming in, a new breed of millennials coming into these roles as your director of curriculum and instruction or professional development, and they might have a totally different way of wanting to do something, and it's not paper and supplies and materials anymore, it's technology. So keeping your eyes and ears open, not for changes in programs and changes in how we want to do it, but oh, maybe we don't, okay, if we want to do things more technology based, maybe we don't need to send everybody out of town to Orlando for a training. We can do a Zoom training, or we can do, you know, getting the information to them digitally or via you know, just something else. That's how come we almost have to have our toe in everything, because we have to say, oh, I did hear the IT folks talk about this way of doing something. This could save us money. And the people that are going to be attending those trainings or the students that are going to be taking those classes better relate to that new way of thinking. So again, you know, we have to look at our little, you know, crystal ball and see how we can help that and encourage those folks to join our team. I want to say team, because we're not always, you know, all we do is say no. We just have to say, well, let's look and see how we can make this work.
And I think to everyone's point, you have to it's kind of an all stakeholder thing. I mean, also, if you have a marketing person on site, that always helps make the budget books look better, which is always helpful, which we don't have, but always wish we would have. Yeah, I think feedback from the, you know, all the groups. You got to surround yourself with people that there's different parents in the community that are very active, and I think all those sorts of people are, you know, key. Your PTOs, your PTAs, or whatever your parent groups are. And your sports teams. I mean, that's a big thing too. You know, you want to get votes out and get things done. Those are all. There's a lot of stakeholders far past the accounting office and the administrative team. There's a lot of folks that you'll find accidentally almost.
All right, going in a slightly different direction, away from people, and something, Joe, you had mentioned when we were talking about how you think about going into the budget season. You were saying one of the things that you do, or the activities that you do first, is start to pull contracts together for things that you know you are going to be purchasing. So in each of your states, are you required to negotiate contracts as part of that process? And if you are, what are some of the recommendations or advice that you would give for win-win situations as you negotiate?
Yeah, in Connecticut, we negotiate directly with. We have our district's a little smaller. We have 4 unionized groups. My prior district, I think, had 8. Yeah, you directly negotiate with those. Some have, you know, 2-3-year contracts. Some have 4. So you obviously, you know, it gets messy when you're in the middle of a year and you have a contract to expire the next year, and kind of make projections against those numbers. But yeah, we directly negotiate with the unions through our, we have an outside lawyer that we use for that. And then we do our own salary projections and pull data from our surrounding areas based on our, you know, where our district ranks in the state as far as in the towns for wealth and all those kinds of things and comparables. So yeah, it's the contract, the teacher's contract particularly is key.
And so in Florida, we have, and we had the same thing in when I was in Hillsborough County, we had 2 unions. we had the teachers union and then instructional support. And in St. Johns County, it's the same thing. We have the teachers union and instructional support. So 2 separate unions. We negotiate every year because, again, we never know what we're going to receive for budgets. We don't have the legislature doesn't give us a high 5-year budget, which is probably a good thing because I think the unions would want to negotiate for 5 years and we just can't do that because we never know what we're going to receive. But this year was a little bit unique. Last year we gave a huge package to the teachers and the instructional union, and this year we couldn't offer as much, but we did get last year our teachers' salary pay up to $47,500. So this year, and those are recurring funds. That's the other thing you have to think about, as Joe said, when you're building your budget. How much is recurring? How much are you going to provide one time? Did you bargain a one-time bonus or one-time monies versus recurring? But this year we were at impasse with our teachers union, and last Wednesday, a week ago today, we had our special magistrate come in and we had our impasse hearing. So now we're waiting on the results from the opinion from the magistrate. But just going into that thinking, what are the teachers wanting? What is the feel? Is it a lot based on money, or is it more, one of the things we're dealing with now is flexibility in life. I don't know how to say that, but like, can we have Fridays and Mondays off and only work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Or, can we get early release on 3 days a week? Well, then now you have your teachers requesting one thing, and then your parents are saying, well, how can you have Friday and Monday off? What are we going to do with our small children? So you just have to weigh in so many things, and working on that negotiation process. And we do a full book every 3 years. So we do compensation every year, but on the full book, it's language, it's everything else. So again, we cannot really start to negotiate if it's on compensation until after the budget is passed to know how much we have put on the table. Prior to that, if it's a language on anything else, we can just do that anytime.
Carrie, anything to add there?
No, not really, because North Carolina, again, we're so dependent upon the General Assembly, and we don't have the unions and the negotiations. I guess I would just go back and kind of say a little bit about the state process of it kind of is a negotiation, I guess, of do no evil with our General Assembly when they're in session, of hoping that, staying on top of what they're doing to make sure that we're aware of what they're proposing and communicating with them on a very regular basis. So that they understand the outcome of what they're doing. Because again, they're not educators, they're legislators. Most of them are lawyers by trade. And they don't really know the impact of what they're proposing sometimes to our school districts. So it's very important to stay on top of what they're doing so that we can help them hopefully make the right decisions for the children of North Carolina.
Okay. All right. So then let's we're nearing down kind of to the end of our questions here. There's a big stakeholder group that we need to be considering when we're talking about budgeting, and that's our community. How do you promote community support for the budget, for the budgeting activities, for the outcomes associated with budget projections and the thoughts and perspectives around that? Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to work with the community to support and promote their perspectives, as well as continuously being able to bring back information to the community based on some of the decisions that are made?
I can just jump in and just say kind of what we've done, whether it was in Hillsborough, the big district, or the medium district here in St. Johns County, where we're always asked to come speak at the PTA meetings or community meetings at the schools, or, for the various school board members in their districts to, whether it's answering questions about space issues. I mean, we are exploding in St. Johns County with not having with growth. So like our schools are stretched so tight. We're having to this year, I think we're up to 90 relocatables we have to bring in for the new school year just to meet the class size amendment, because we can only have certain number of students in each core classes. and to talk about that, and to talk about the sales tax initiative, and just to listen, not just talk, but listen, and thank the community for, hey, you're paying a sales tax so we can build these additions onto the schools, or we can build new schools, or we can purchase the land to buy schools. So thank you community. And we're going to be quiet and we're going to listen to what you're having to say. And as everybody knows, it's the whole textbook thing, and what do we have in the library books, and how can we work together as a team to come to resolution on that. So again, it's putting ourselves out there, and like Joe said, they have a school board meeting tonight, or they've got a budget hearing tonight, and just putting the word out there. And we want to invite them. We do want you to come. We do want you to hear, and we want to explain what we do, because we think it's a great process. It's all we have. And we want to make sure everybody understands, because it's not what we do. It's not a lot about how you balance your checkbook at home. It's do we deal with emergencies like you do at home? Yep, like the refrigerator died and now you got to find another one and you didn't have the money. And what does fund balance really mean? Why do you have so much set aside for that? Why would you have that money? Why aren't you spending it on the kids? Why aren't you spending it on the teachers? So again, it's more of a teaching, learning, and give and take, that what our focus has to be as finance officers and for our teams at the school districts.
Any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's a big trust issue too with the community. I mean, you've got to have, it takes time. I'm here, it's my 4th year here, and it does take time to build relationships with the board and kind of trust from your town officials and those sorts of things, that in a sense what you're giving, what you're asking for is reasonable and respectful. We're in the middle of doing a bonding project now for renovation work. And again, we're not trying to replace kind of granite countertops or quartz. Stuff is really, broken and badly need repair. So I think those, and showing the community, we have a tour tonight, actually at 5 o'clock, and go through our pool, which needs a pretty major renovation. I mean, I think those kind of, open your house up to show people what's going on. I think it's a good thing. There's a balance between the two that you want, in a sense, too much, but at the same point, you want to show what you're asking for is valid and reasonable.
Yeah, and I would just add in there, in my last district, the superintendent had a parent advisory committee that met quarterly, and it was great because you could bring up concerns, things that we were doing in the district, and if there were funding things that needed their support or needed them to be more aware of it and understand why we were doing what we were doing, to utilize that group. That group was very instrumental the year that back in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a budget cliff and we got some federal funds and those were going to expire and the state couldn't pick up that difference. We needed to do something to continue our one-to-one program that we had just started. And we went to our public to increase our supplemental tax. And originally we went to them to say we wanted to go up 3 cents, thinking that was just, I was like, oh, wow, they're not going to be happy about that. And I fully expected them to go get rid of the computers, put the textbooks back in the classrooms. And it was very heartwarming, and I just can't even tell you how wonderful it was for them to say, no, you really need to continue what you're doing. This is great. Our kids love it. We know it means that you're going to, we'll have to pay more taxes, but hey, instead of 3, why don't you do 5 cents? And then that way you're not worrying about this again later. Gretchen, you're right. My mouth fell open during the meetings. I was like, I left the meetings thinking, did I really hear what I thought I heard? But again, like Joe said, it's building that support and that trust. I mean, because we had been meeting with them on a regular basis, because I'd been there long enough that they felt that they could trust that I was not trying to hide money somewhere, and that, we weren't just coming to them with a request that was just, oh, well, we can't, we don't want to do the math. So here, just give us more money so we can do it. They truly trusted us and wanted us to do the right things with their kids, and trusted us enough to allow us to do that increase. So things like that, build great trust and help you through the hard times, and then make it a little easier to live through the times that are not quite so hard.
Great. All right. So now we are coming down to the close. And one of the things that I always think are important for our experts to do on behalf of our audience is to leave them with a few takeaways, making sure that they can leave with something very tangible and really help to motivate them make some of those best decisions that you've made in your experience, or to use some of those best practices. So what's one piece of advice you would give yourself if you go back the 2 decades and start again and approach the budgeting cycle differently? What would you have done, either specifically with budgeting or just in general in your career, in order to move along the budgeting cycle better, more efficiently now?
So Dawn, I'll just jump in, and actually I had 2 things, but I'll only bring up one first, just because I think we've kind of touched on it already between Joe and Terry. So the first thing for myself, like as Gretchen, what would I have told myself 20 years ago? That I'm never alone in this process. Like, I can reach out and I can talk to people where I work. I can pick up the phone, and this is why it's so important. So I was excited when Rachel reached out to me and said, "Hey, Gretchen, would you mind being on a panel? We're doing this." And I was so excited, not because it was like, woohoo, I get to be on camera. No, it's I get to meet Joe and Terry, and I've never met them before today in person, have never met them in person, but now I feel like, listening to their heartaches and everything they've had to go through, if I had a question for Joe about something that I heard him say, I feel like I could reach out to him and say, "Joe, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Gretchen and I'm from Florida, and I know we don't have anything in common, but what would you have done in this situation? Because you talked about funding this way." Or, "Terry, oh my gosh, you said Charlotte Mecklenburg. I think I would go back to my previous, I need help with this question, but do you know somebody by the name of Sheila Shirley? I was on a panel with her a long time ago and she was great," and all this other stuff. So just to know I'm not by myself, and I don't have to carry this heavy burden of 6,000 employees, that how am I going to find money to pay through the end of June, the end of the school year? Has Joe ever gone through this? I've got to ask him, because I would feel open to ask him a question about funding versus, somebody else. I don't want anybody to laugh at my question, but I think he's a professional and he's gone through it enough, or Terry with her history and all these other districts. So not being afraid to ask for help, and actually reaching out to the ClassWallet team. I've reached out to, Mallory and Michelle and Rachel all the time. And it's not so much like, well, they're a vendor and they're going to want you to, no, it's us working together. So for people to have confidence enough in themselves to get to the position they're in, ask for help, ask questions.
I think that's great advice. I think it's hard for many people to be able to do that, because you take on the responsibility and the accountability, and you think that that prohibits you from asking for help, when really, by asking for help, you're doing all of the things we just discussed today. You're bringing other perspectives in. You're helping the community understand the process. So in our questions for support, you're also creating a teaching moment so that other people can be incorporated into the process. So I think that's great advice. Anything else, Joe, Terry?
Well, I think when you first come in, you've got to be, someone told this when I first started too, you're going to sit in that chair, and don't assume you're going to find the missing $500,000 or $1 million, like they didn't find, they built the budget. I do think there is a sense sometimes of urgency to come in, and a lot of things there are there for reasons. And, while you shouldn't just keep the status quo, I do think there's a time to reach out to your local ASBO. The wealth of resources, as Gretchen said, and Terry's alluded to too, that there's a wealth of knowledge and friends. Everyone's probably done this at some point, or screwed it up at some point, in my case, some days. So yeah, I think reaching out to that, and just again being mindful that there's programs and initiatives that are there, and kind of to reflect and learn in your beginning time. I think that's, don't go in with the I'm quick going to take this out or cut that or remove that or change that process. They're there for reasons.
And if I could
Terry,
just,
any last words?
oh gosh, if I could just circle back and combine both what Gretchen and Joe said, yes, you've got to have that support group. Excuse me. And you got to give yourself permission. The thing that I've always said as I've moved from district to district, and it was hard the first year, is to give yourself permission to just go with it for the year. Know that first year is a learning year. It's scary. You didn't create that budget. You don't know what's really in it. You don't know what really has to happen in that district. People come to you and they ask you, well, can we do such and such? Well, I'm not sure. Give me a minute and let me look and I'll answer that question. And sometimes you have to go on faith that, you asked them enough questions that you feel like it was part of what the budget process should have included. And you have to go on faith that it was there, unless it's so big a number that you're thinking, oh, probably can't do that one unless I can actually see a line item for it. But give yourself permission to learn and to see how the district works. As I moved from district to district, I had to give myself permission every time I moved to a new district to know that I was a new person all over again. I was learning all over again. It was like starting fresh. I knew what I knew, but I didn't know that district. So give yourself permission to learn and to get acquainted with the district. And like Gretchen said, you've got to have that network of friends, people that you can call on. I've got my little network of friends that when I started, and I'm like you, Gretchen, I've not met you before in person. I've had the pleasure of meeting Joe in person, but I feel like I could pick up the phone and call y'all, and y'all might laugh with me, but you wouldn't laugh at me for asking what I'm going to ask. And you need those kind of friends that you can call it. Will laugh with you and go, oh yeah, I've been there. Here's what I would have done.
Wow. Well, yeah, thank you so much for imparting all of this great information today and for our audience and for getting to know each other. Being vulnerable about what you've learned and what you haven't and the successes and, even those areas of opportunity that we can all learn from each other. So thank you so much for being part of today. Thank you, Jordan, behind the scenes. And thanks all of you for joining us for today. This session was recorded, so it will be available to you. You should receive an email shortly with that link. Thank you all for being part, and please look out for the next and upcoming ClassWallet webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Joe. Thank you, Terry.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank y'all so
Bye.
much.